The year was 2247, and humanity had finally done what they had dreamed of for centuries. They had made contact with alien life. The message came from deep space, a signal that proved humans were not alone in the universe. Within weeks, ships arrived in Earth's orbit. They were beautiful and terrifying. It's made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light. The Galactic Council had sent their representatives. 12 ancient species had ruled the stars for over 50,000 years, and now they had come to judge the newcomers. Ambassador Zelthos of the Varn Collective was the first to set foot on Earth. He was tall and thin, his body made of something that looked like living crystal. When he spoke, his words came as vibrations that translators turned into human language. Admiral Kevin Marshall stood in the Great Hall of the United Nations. Watching the alien delegation examine humanity's representatives, they looked at the humans the way a person might look at insects. There was curiosity, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like disgust. The council spent 3 days studying Earth. They reviewed human history, their wars, their conflicts, their endless struggle for resources and power. They watched footage of atomic bombs and concentration camps, of slavery and genocide. And then they delivered their verdict. Humanity was forbidden from joining the Galactic Community. Dr. Catherine Price had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. She was the world's leading expert on what alien life might look like. And now she stood in silence as Ambassador Zelthos explained the decision. "Your species is too violent," the ambassador said, his crystal body humming with each word. "Too unpredictable. You adapt too quickly? Change to Isley. The Council has seen species like yours before. They spread like disease. They consume everything they touch. You will remain here in your small system, where you can do no harm." The containment field went up within a month. It was invisible to human eyes, but ships that approached the edge of the solar system simply stopped working. Their engines died, their computers failed, and they drifted in the cold darkness until rescue ships could bring them home. Kevin Marshall spent the next 20 years watching the stars he could never reach. He grew old, retired from the military, and spent his final days teaching young cadets about the universe that had rejected them. But not everyone accepted defeat. In a secret facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, a team of scientists worked on a problem everyone said was impossible. Dr. Daniel Cooper was young, barely 30 years old, but he had ideas that made older physicists nervous. He believed that space itself could be folded, bent like a piece of paper so that 2 distant points could touch. "The containment field stops our engines," Daniel explained to his team one night. "It disrupts our power systems. But what if we didn't need to travel through space at all? What if we could step around it?" It took 7 years and cost the lives of 3 test pilots before Daniel's theory became reality. The full drive was crude and dangerous. Ships that used it sometimes came out the other side twisted into shapes that made no sense. But it worked. For the first time since the Council's decree, humans could leave their prison. Commander Lisa Brennan was chosen to lead the first mission beyond the barrier. She was 42 years old, a veteran pilot with steady hands and a calm voice. Her ship was small, carrying only 5 crew members. They knew they might not come back. "The galaxy forgot about us," Lisa told her crew as they prepared for the jump. "They locked us away and moved on with their lives. Let's go remind them we exist." The full drive activated with a sound like reality itself was tearing. The ship twisted, stretched, and then snapped back into shape somewhere else entirely. Lisa looked out the viewport and saw stars she had never seen before. They had done it. They were free. For the next month, they explored in secret. They found worlds the Council had claimed, and worlds they had ignored. They mapped trade routes and communication networks. And most importantly, they discovered something that would change everything. The galaxy was not as united as the Council claimed. There were other species who had been rejected, other civilizations deemed too dangerous or too primitive for membership. They called themselves the Broken, and they lived in the spaces between empires. Surviving on scraps and dreams, Lisa made contact with a broken trader named Vex. a small creature with too many eyes and a nervous laugh. He was terrified of the council, terrified of being caught talking to the forbidden species. But he was also curious. "You escaped the barrier?" Vex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That should not be possible. The council's technology is perfect." "Nothing is perfect," Lisa replied. "We found a way. And we're not going back." When Lisa's ship returned to Earth, they brought more than just information. They brought hope. The fold drive worked. The barrier could be bypassed. Humanity was no longer trapped. The world's leaders gathered in secret to discuss what came next. Some wanted to reveal themselves immediately to demand their place among the stars. Others urged caution. The council had fleets that numbered in the millions. Starting a war they could not win would only prove the aliens right about human violence. Dr. Catherine Price, now old and tired, offered a different path. "They think we are trapped," she said. "They think we are helpless. Let them keep thinking that. We will grow in secret, build in silence, and when we are ready, they will learn what happens when you cage a species that refuses to be caged." The decision was unanimous. Humanity would expand into the galaxy, but they would do it quietly. They would settle the worlds no one wanted, build the alliances no one expected, and prepare for the day when the council finally realized their mistake. Daniel Cooper was given unlimited resources to improve the fold drive. Lisa Brennan was promoted to admiral of a fleet that did not officially exist. Across the planet, the best and brightest were recruited for a mission that would take generations. The council had forbidden humanity from the stars. They had declared them too dangerous, too unpredictable, too adaptable. They had looked at human history and seen only violence and chaos. They had not looked closely enough. In the years that followed, ships slipped through the folds of space carrying colonists to distant worlds. They built homes in asteroid fields and on frozen moons. They learned to survive in places the ancient species had dismissed as worthless. And with each passing year, they grew stronger. The Galactic Council continued their endless debates and ancient rituals. Secure in the knowledge that the human problem had been solved, the containment field held. Earth was quiet. The primitive species had been contained. They did not know that the cage was already empty. They did not know that humanity was coming, and by the time they learned the truth, it would be far too late to stop what they had started. 100 years passed since the first ship escaped the barrier, and humanity had changed in ways the Galactic Council could never have imagined. They had spread across 300 star systems, building colonies in places the ancient species had forgotten existed. They had become ghosts in the darkness between empires, invisible and growing stronger with each passing day. Governor Samuel Turner stood on the observation deck of New Montana, a colony built inside a hollowed asteroid that drifted through unclaimed space. 3 million people called this rock their home. They had farms that grew food under artificial suns, factories that built ships and weapons, and children who had never seen Earth but called themselves human with fierce pride. Another convoy arrived last night, his assistant reported. 2,000 colonists from the Luna settlements? They're asking about housing assignments. Samuel nodded slowly. The colony was growing faster than they could build, but that was a good problem to have. Every person who made the journey through fold space was another pair of hands, another mind, another soldier if it came to that. The secret of humanity's expansion was simple. They took what no one else wanted. The Varn Collective had surveyed this asteroid field centuries ago and declared it worthless. No valuable minerals, no strategic position, no reason to care about it. They never considered that someone might want to live there simply because no one was watching. Across the galaxy, similar stories played out on frozen moons and barren planets. Human colonists learned to survive in conditions that would have killed the softer species of the Council. They recycled every drop of water, grew food in underground vaults, and built communities that asked nothing from the wider galaxy except to be left alone. Diplomat Grace Mitchell was the architect of humanity's greatest secret weapon. She traveled between the rejected species, the ones the Council had cast aside, and she offered them something no one else had. She offered them friendship. "The Council calls us the Broken," said a trader from the Kalish people during one of Grace's visits. The Kalish were small, covered in soft fur, and had been denied membership because their home world lacked valuable resources. "They say we are not worth their attention." Grace smiled and poured him another drink. "We were forbidden from the stars entirely. They put a wall around our whole solar system and left us to die. I think that makes us the most broken of all." The Kalish trader laughed, and that laugh was worth more than gold. Species who had been enemies for centuries began talking to each other through human intermediaries. Old grudges were set aside in favor of new opportunities. The Shadow Alliance was born not in a grand ceremony, but in 1,000 small conversations, 1,000 shared drinks, 1,000 moments of trust. Within 50 years, the Alliance included 23 species. They shared technology, trade routes, and most importantly, information. When Council patrols changed their schedules, the Alliance knew. When new territories were claimed, the Alliance knew. They had become invisible. They were not blind. Dr. Nathan Ross led the research team that gave humanity its technological edge. Working in laboratories hidden in the hearts of dead stars, his scientists developed weapons and defenses that the Council had never imagined. They had no choice. Without access to Council markets, they could not buy what they needed. They had to invent it themselves. Adaptive armor, Nathan explained to a group of military officers during a demonstration. He stood next to a small drone that hovered in the testing chamber. "Watch carefully." The officers watched as weapons fired at the drone. The first shot left a small mark. The second shot did less damage. By the 10th shot, the weapons were having no effect at all. The armor was learning, changing its composition to counter each new threat. "How long until it adapts to everything?" one officer asked. Nathan smiled. "That's the beauty of it. It never stops learning. The more you attack it, the stronger it becomes." Human technology evolved in unexpected directions. Their ships were not elegant like Council vessels, but they were tough and versatile. Their weapons were not sophisticated, but they hit hard and kept firing long after more refined systems would have failed. They built for survival, not for beauty. And that made all the difference. The first sign that something was wrong came when a Varn mining expedition vanished near the outer reach. The Council sent investigators who found nothing but empty space. Then a Kalori patrol ship went silent. Then a Zenthari supply convoy disappeared without a trace. High Counselor Murthax of the Varn demanded answers. He had held his position for 3 centuries and had never faced a mystery he could not solve. His intelligence services searched for pirates, for rogue species, for any explanation that made sense. What they found terrified them. "The humans," his chief investigator reported, her crystal body flickering with nervous light. "They escaped the barrier. We do not know how or when, but they are out here. They have been out here for a very long time." Murthax stared at the report in silence. 300 systems. Millions of colonists. An alliance of rejected species united under human leadership. All of it built in secret while the Council celebrated their victory over the primitive Earth species. How is this possible? He demanded. "We had them contained. We had them controlled." "Stopped watching," his investigator admitted. "We assumed the barrier would hold forever. We assumed they would give up." Murthax rose from his seat, his ancient body creaking with the movement. He had lived long enough to see empires rise and fall, long enough to know what this discovery meant. The humans had not given up. They had not accepted their fate. They had done exactly what the Council had feared they would do. They had adapted. Emergency sessions were called. Species that had not spoken in centuries sent representatives to debate the human problem. Some wanted to negotiate, to offer the humans a place in the Council in exchange for peace. Others demanded immediate military action, a crushing blow that would end the threat forever. The debates lasted for months. Meanwhile, human colonies continued to grow. Shadow Alliance ships continued to move through the darkness. And somewhere in a hidden command center, Admiral Lisa Brennan watched the Council's every move and planned for what was coming. She was old now, her hair white and her hands no longer as steady as they had been. But her mind was sharp, and she knew the council better than they knew themselves. They'll attack, she told her officers. They can't help themselves. They've ruled this galaxy for 50,000 years. They don't know how to share. And when they do, asked Commander Ryan Ellis, her most promising student. Lisa looked out at the stars. At the vast empire humanity had built in secret, at the alliance of forgotten species who had placed their trust in creatures the council had tried to cage. When they do, she said quietly, we'll teach them what happens when you underestimate humans. The galaxy held its breath. Waiting for the storm that everyone knew was coming, the council's response came on a quiet morning when the people of New Geneva were just beginning their day. Children were walking to school. Workers were heading to their jobs. Families were eating breakfast together, aware that 10,000 warships had just emerged from fold space above their world governor. Patricia Lane received the warning only minutes before the fleet arrived. She was a practical woman, gray-haired and stern, who had spent 30 years building this colony from nothing. Now, she stood in her office and watched the sky fill with enemy ships. "This is High Admiral Vethros of the Council Fleet," the transmission announced. The Admiral's face appeared on every screen in the colony. Xanthari with scales the color of old blood and eyes that showed no mercy. "You will surrender unconditionally. Your illegal settlements will be dismantled. Your people will be returned to Earth. Resistance is not advised." Patricia looked at her staff, at the fear in their eyes. At the children she could see through her window running for shelter. She thought about everything they had built, every sacrifice they had made, every dream they had dreamed of a home among the stars. Then she opened a channel that would broadcast across every human frequency in the galaxy. "We built these homes with our own hands. On worlds you abandoned, we will not leave." The Battle of New Geneva lasted 17 hours. The Council expected a quick victory. They had numbers, experience, and technology that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. They expected the humans to see reason, to understand that resistance was hopeless. They were wrong, Commander. Ryan Ellis led the defense fleet of 47 ships against an enemy that outnumbered them more than 200 to 1. It should have been a slaughter. It nearly was. But human ships did things the Council had never seen before. The fold drives. Those crude and dangerous engines that the humans had invented in desperation became weapons. Ryan ordered his ships to create micro-jumps, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield faster than the enemy could track. When a Varn cruiser locked weapons on a human destroyer, the destroyer simply folded away and reappeared behind the cruiser with weapons, already firing. Other ships used the drives differently. They opened fold points directly in the path of enemy vessels. Council ships that flew into these tiers in space came out the other side twisted and broken, their crews dead before they knew what had happened. "They're cheating," Admiral Vethros screamed at his officers. "They're not fighting properly." But there was nothing improper about survival. The Council fleet took heavy losses in the first 6 hours. 3,000 ships destroyed or disabled, more than they had lost in the past century of minor conflicts. But they had brought 10,000, and eventually numbers began to tell. Human ships were destroyed. Stations were overrun, and when the planetary bombardment began, there was nothing Ryan could do to stop it. 2 million people died on New Geneva that day. The Council called it necessary. The humans called it murder. And across the galaxy, colonies that had hoped to remain hidden began preparing for war. Admiral Maria Santos took command of the human forces 3 days after. Now, Geneva fell. She was 60 years old, a tactical genius who had spent her career studying how weak forces could defeat strong ones. Her methods were unconventional. Her results were undeniable. "The Council fights the way they have always fought," Maria explained to her commanders during their first meeting. "They form lines. They exchange fire. They follow rules that have worked for 50,000 years. We don't have that luxury. We're going to fight differently." Human fleets stopped meeting Council forces in open battle. Instead, they struck at supply lines, destroying the ships that carried food and fuel to the enemy's war machine. They attacked communication relays, leaving Council admirals blind and confused. They hit shipyards and repair facilities, ensuring that every ship the Council lost stayed lost. The Council had more soldiers, more ships, more resources, but they had to protect everything. Humans only had to attack. "This is not war," a Varn commander complained after his convoy was destroyed by a human strike force that disappeared before his escorts could respond. "This is terrorism." Maria Santos heard the recording and smiled. "No," she said. "This is how you beat someone who thinks they can't lose." The war lasted 12 years. It spread across hundreds of systems, drawing in species that had no love for humans, but even less love for the Council that had oppressed them. The Shadow Alliance honored its treaties. When human colonies were attacked, their allies responded. When human fleets needed support, strange ships appeared alongside them. The broken were broken no more. They were angry and they were armed. And they fought with a fury that shocked the ancient races who had dismissed them for so long. Private conflicts erupted across the galaxy as species under Council rules saw their chance for freedom. The Calorie Practical, as always, calculated the odds and switched sides. The Varn found themselves fighting rebellions on worlds they had ruled for millennia. The Zenthari threw everything they had into crushing the humans. But the humans would not stay crushed. Admiral Vethros died when his flagship was caught in a fold trap above the colony of New Boston. He had been trying to repeat his victory at New Geneva, but the humans had learned from their losses. Maria Santos had placed ships in positions that made no tactical sense until the moment the trap closed. "You fought by the rules," Maria said as she watched his ship burn on her tactical display. "We wrote new ones." By the 12th year, the Council was exhausted. Their fleets had been reduced by more than half. 3 member species had withdrawn from the war. Unwilling to spend more lives on a conflict they no longer believed they could win, the economy of the galaxy, so carefully built over thousands of years, was collapsing under the strain. High Counselor Murthax, the same leader who had ordered the attack on New Geneva, finally requested communication with human leadership. The message was short and simple. "We wish to discuss terms for a ceasefire." Maria Santos received the message in her command center, surrounded by officers who had fought beside her for years. They had lost friends and family. They had seen worlds burn and children die. They had every reason to refuse, to continue fighting until the Council was destroyed entirely. But Maria was not a creature of revenge. She was a soldier who understood that wars must end, that peace was the only victory worth having. "Tell them we'll meet," she said. "But they should understand something. We're not negotiating because we're weak. We're negotiating because we don't want to become what they are." The galaxy held its breath as the two sides prepared to talk. Humanity had proven that they could fight. Now they would have to prove that they could build something better than the empire they had defeated. The Treaty of Andros was signed on a neutral station that floated in the empty space between empires. Representatives from humanity, the Council, the Shadow Alliance, gathered in a chamber that had been built specifically for this moment. The walls were made of transparent metal, showing the stars that had been the prize of this terrible war. Admiral Maria Santos sat at the human table, her uniform worn from years of conflict. Beside her was Governor Patricia Lane, survivor of New Geneva, her face marked by scars that would never fully heal. Across from them sat the beings who had once dismissed their entire species as unworthy of the stars. High Counselor Murthax looked older than he had 12 years ago. His crystal body had lost some of its shine, and his movements were slow and careful. The war had taken something from him that would never return. "We are prepared to recognize human sovereignty over all territories currently held," Maria began. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "This is not a request. This is a statement of fact. You cannot take back what we have built." Murthax nodded slowly. He had known this moment was coming from the day the first reports of human colonies had crossed his desk. The Council had made a mistake, and now they had to live with the consequences. "The Council accepts these terms," he said. "We will withdraw our forces from all contested regions. We will release all human prisoners. We will... There is more," Patricia interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but the room fell silent. Everyone knew what she had lost, what her people had suffered. New Geneva will be rebuilt. The council will pay for every brick, every window, every park where children will play. You will pay for what you destroyed. The Zenthari representative hissed in anger, but Murthax raised a hand for silence. It will be done, he said simply. The treaty took 3 days to finalize. Every word was argued over, every provision debated. But in the end, the document was signed by all parties. And the First War officially came to an end. But the treaty was only the beginning of humanity's rise. Over the next 50 years, the galaxy transformed in ways that no one had predicted. Human trade networks, built in secret during the years of hiding, now operated openly. Merchants from Earth and its colonies offered goods at prices the Council could not match. They traded fairly with species who had been cheated by ancient monopolies. They opened markets that had been closed for millennia. President Andrew Blake presided over the formation of the Human Stellar Federation in the year 2401. It was not just a human government. The Shadow Alliance species were invited to join, offered full membership with equal rights and representation. 23 species that had been rejected by the Council found a home among the people who had once been rejected themselves. We offer what the Council never did, Andrew announced during the founding ceremony. Equality, opportunity, a voice. Here, there are no ancient rights and no permanent powers. Every species rises or falls based on what they contribute, not on how long they have existed. The Council watched their influence fade with each passing year. Species that had been members for 10,000 years began asking uncomfortable questions. Why did the Zenthari hold 3 permanent seats while younger races held none? Why were trade agreements written to benefit the ancient empires? Why should things continue as they always had when the humans had shown that change was possible? Ambassador Catherine Wells became the face of human diplomacy during these turbulent years. She had a gift for finding common ground, for making enemies feel like potential friends. Her patience was legendary, and her understanding of alien psychology helped prevent a dozen small conflicts from becoming large ones. We don't want to replace the Council, Catherine explained to skeptical Varn leaders during a particularly tense negotiation. We want to make something better, something that includes everyone. Your species has wisdom from 50,000 years of civilization. We have energy and new ideas. Together, we could build something neither of us could build alone. Some council members adapted to the new reality. The Kalari, always practical, saw the direction of the galactic wind and adjusted their sails accordingly. They opened trade relations with human colonies, shared technology, and slowly built a partnership that benefited both species. The Varn were slower to change, but even they began to see the advantages of cooperation over conflict. Others refused to accept what they saw as the degradation of galactic civilization. The Zenthari Dominion had ruled their section of the galaxy since before humans had learned to make fire. They had fought the First War because they believed humans were a threat to order and stability. Their defeat had not changed that belief. It had only made them more certain. Supreme Hierarch, Valtos, took power 5 years after the treaty was signed. He was young for a Zenthari leader, barely 3 centuries old, and he burned with ambition that his elders had long ago lost. He looked at the humans spreading across the galaxy and saw an infection that needed to be cut out before it destroyed everything the ancient races had built in secret. Shipyards hidden in the dark spaces between stars, the Zenthari began building a new fleet. They studied human technology, learning from their defeats. They developed weapons specifically designed to counter fold drives and adaptive armor. They recruited species who felt threatened by human expansion, promising them a return to the old ways. Dr. Rachel Stone, humanity's foremost intelligence analyst, was the first to notice the signs. Ship movements that made no sense. Resource transfers that served no legitimate purpose. Communications that stopped whenever human vessels came near. They're preparing for something, Rachel warned the Federation Council during a closed session. The Zenthari have not accepted peace. They're waiting for the right moment to strike. President Linda Morrison, who had replaced Andrew Blake after his retirement, listened carefully. She was the great-granddaughter of refugees from New Geneva, and she understood better than most what Xanthari hatred could mean. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Difficult to say," Rachel admitted. "Years, certainly. Maybe decades. But it's coming. They will never accept a galaxy where humans hold power. They are not built for compromise." The Federation began its own preparations, quietly and carefully. Defense networks were expanded. Alliance treaties were strengthened. Ships were built, and crews were trained. All the while, human diplomats continued their work, hoping that war could be avoided. Knowing that it probably could not, Catherine Wells met with Xanthari representatives one final time. 5 years before the attack came, she offered them partnership, trade, a seat at every table where decisions were made. She offered them everything except surrender. The Xanthari representative listened, politely, and then spoke words that Catherine would remember for the rest of her life. "You do not understand," he said. "We ruled this galaxy before your species existed. We will rule it long after you are gone. This peace you have built is temporary. All things built by lesser species are temporary. We are simply waiting for the proper moment to correct the mistake our ancestors made when they failed to destroy you completely." Catherine returned to Earth with a heavy heart. She had spent her life building bridges between species. Now she had to accept that some bridges could never be built. The storm was coming. All humanity could do was prepare. The attack came on a morning that began like any other. The sun was rising over the Atlantic Ocean. Children were waking up for school. Coffee was brewing in 1 billion homes. And then the sky split open, and the Xanthari came for Earth. 200 years after the exile decree had tried to cage humanity forever, 5,000 warships emerged from fold space directly above the human homeworld. They were not here to negotiate. They were not here to demand surrender. They were here to finish what the Council had started so long ago. Supreme Commander Marcus Cole had exactly 7 minutes from the first warning to the first weapons fire. 7 minutes to make decisions that would determine whether humanity survived or burned. He stood in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching his displays fill with enemy contacts, and he felt strangely calm. "All defense platforms engage," he ordered. "Signal the colony fleets. And someone get me Admiral Santos." Maria Santos was 93 years old, retired for 2 decades, living quietly on Mars with her grandchildren. But she had never truly left the service. Her mind was still sharp, her instincts still reliable. When the call came, she did not hesitate. "Patch me through to the defense network," she said, already moving to her personal command station. "And tell my granddaughter I'm proud of her." Captain Alina Santos was 31 years old, commander of the destroyer Swift Justice. And she was about to fight the most important battle in human history. She had grown up on stories of her grandmother's victories, had trained her whole life for a moment she hoped would never come. Now it was here. The battle of Soul began with fire and ended with fire. But between those flames was the most desperate fighting humanity had ever known. The Xanthari had learned from the First War. Their ships carried weapons designed specifically to disrupt fold drives. Their shields had been engineered to resist adaptive armor. They had studied every trick humanity had ever used and developed counters for each one. The defense network protecting Earth had been built over a century, layer upon layer of orbital stations, weapons platforms, and automated systems. The Xanthari hit it with everything they had, and still it held. Stations were destroyed, but their crews evacuated and new stations activated. Platforms were overrun, but they took enemy ships with them. Every inch of space was defended with blood and courage. Admiral Christopher Kane led the Federation fleet in the decisive engagement near Jupiter's moons. He was a quiet man, not given to speeches or dramatic gestures, but his tactical skill was legendary. His ships fought as a single organism, each vessel knowing exactly where to be and what to do. The Xanthari Center was their strongest point, a wall of battleships and carriers that had never been broken in 10,000 years of warfare. Kane attacked it anyway, throwing his ships against the enemy again and again, while the Xanthari commander grew more confident with each repelled assault. Then Kane's ships began to fold. not away from the battle, but into it. They emerged inside the Zenthari formation, appearing so close to enemy vessels that both sides' weapons were useless. Boarding parties flooded onto Zenthari ships, fighting hand-to-hand in corridors designed for creatures twice their size. The center broke. The Zenthari commander ordered a retreat that turned into a rout. And Christopher Kane died when a Zenthari cruiser rammed his flagship in a final act of spite. But not before he had won the battle that saved Earth. By the third day, it was over. The Zenthari Supreme Hierarch, watching his fleet burn from the bridge of his command ship, finally accepted what his pride had never allowed him to believe. Humans were not a lesser species to be exterminated. They were a force that could not be stopped. He requested communication with human leadership. President Linda. Morrison received the transmission in the same bunker where Marcus Cole had given his first orders 3 days ago. She was exhausted, her eyes red from sleepless nights and tears for the dead. But her voice was steady when she spoke. "You wish to speak?" she said simply. The Hierarch's response was broadcast across the galaxy. Translated into 1,000 languages, heard by species who had believed the Zenthari would rule forever. "We underestimated you. From the beginning, we saw primitives trapped in a single system. We saw a species to be contained and forgotten. We were wrong." Linda Morrison looked at the image of the Zenthari leader, at the defeat in his ancient eyes. At the ruins of his fleet visible through the viewport behind him. "Yes," she said. "You were." The Zenthari surrendered unconditionally. Their fleet was dismantled, their weapons destroyed. For the first time in 50,000 years, they had been defeated, not by equals, but by a species they had tried to exterminate in the years that followed. They did not claim Zenthari worlds or demand their submission. Instead, they did something that shocked the galaxy. They built something new. The United Species Assembly replaced the old Galactic Council. Representation was based on population, not on age or power. Any species could join. Any voice could be heard. The ancient races, who had ruled unchallenged for millennia, found themselves sitting beside species they had once dismissed as worthless. Ambassador Catherine Wells, now elderly but still working, gave the keynote address at the Assembly's founding ceremony. The hall was filled with representatives from 300 species, each one equal under the new system. 2 centuries ago, we were told we had no place among the stars, Catherine said, that we were too young, too violent, too unpredictable. Perhaps they were right about some of that, but they were wrong about what it meant. She paused, looking out at the gathered delegates. Varn and Kalori sat beside humans and Kelish. Species that had been enemies for generations shared tables with species they had never met. The broken were broken no more. Our violence taught us the cost of war. Our youth meant we had no bad habits to unlearn. Our unpredictability meant we could imagine things the ancient races had forgotten were possible. They feared what we might become. Now they know. The assembly hall was silent, waiting. We became their equals, their partners, and eventually their leaders. Not because we conquered them, but because we offered something better. A galaxy where every species matters, where every voice counts, where the future belongs to everyone willing to build it. The applause began slowly and then grew into something overwhelming. Species that had once dismissed humanity as primitives rose to their feet. Former enemies stood beside former allies. The Zenthari representative, humbled but present, added his voice to the celebration. In the front row, Elena Santos sat beside her grandmother Maria, who had lived long enough to see the peace she had fought for finally become real. Maria was 103 years old, her body frail, but her eyes still bright. "We did it," Elena whispered. Maria smiled and squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "No," she said. "This is just the beginning. We showed them what humans can do when someone tells us we can't. Ow. Now we have to show them what we can do when no one is trying to stop us." Outside the assembly hall, the stars waited. They had been forbidden to humanity once, declared off-limits by species who thought they knew better. Now, they belonged to everyone, a shared inheritance for all the peoples of the galaxy. The exile decree had been meant to cage humanity forever. Instead, it had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. And now, together with the allies they had made along the way, they would build a future that even the ancient races had never imagined. The story of humanity among the stars was not ending, it was only beginning.